In a small, quiet town nestled far from the bustling cities, there stood an old correctional facility surrounded by dense woods. The building had seen better days. Its paint was chipped, its walls were cracked, and the air around it carried a sense of gloom that made even visitors uneasy. Inside these cold gray walls lived women whose lives had taken unexpected turns. Some were guilty, some claimed innocence, but all shared one thing in common. They were trapped within a system that often felt more like punishment than rehabilitation. Among them was Claire Bennett, a name no one paid much attention to when she first arrived. She looked just like any other inmate, wearing the standard-issue orange jumpsuit, her hair tied back in a simple ponytail, and eyes downcast as if trying to avoid drawing notice. What the guards and inmates didn't know was that Claire wasn't really who she appeared to be. Beneath her unassuming exterior lay a sharp mind trained to uncover secrets and expose corruption. Claire was not an ordinary prisoner. She was an undercover investigator working for the Department of Corrections. Her mission began months earlier after alarming reports started surfacing about misconduct at this very facility. Anonymous letters described horrifying accounts of abuse, manipulation, and exploitation at the hands of certain officers. One name came up repeatedly: Officer Derek Hale. A towering figure with a stern face and an intimidating presence, Hale ruled the prison with an iron fist. He was known for his harsh treatment of inmates, especially those he deemed weak or vulnerable. His reputation preceded him, and many whispered about how he used his authority not just to enforce rules, but to control and dominate. When Claire read through the files on Hale, her stomach churned. The allegations against him painted a picture of someone who thrived on power and fear. Women under his watch reported being verbally degraded, physically intimidated, and sometimes worse. For Claire, this wasn't just another case. It hit close to home. As someone who believed deeply in justice, she couldn't stand idly by while people suffered behind closed doors. So, when her superior asked for volunteers to go undercover and investigate, Claire raised her hand without hesitation. The preparation process was intense. Claire spent weeks learning everything she could about life inside a women's prison. She studied real cases of embezzlement to craft a believable backstory, memorized legal jargon to make her character convincing, and practiced maintaining composure under pressure. When the day finally came, she walked into the facility as Claire, a mild-mannered office assistant sentenced to 6 months for stealing company funds. Her heart pounded as the heavy metal door clanged shut behind her, sealing her off from the outside world. Adjusting to prison life proved harder than Claire anticipated. The days were long, filled with monotonous routines and strict schedules. Meals consisted of bland food served in plastic trays, and recreation time meant sitting in a cramped courtyard surrounded by barbed wire fences. At night, the dormitory echoed with the sounds of restless sleepers tossing and turning on thin mattresses. But what struck Claire most was the atmosphere of fear that permeated every corner of the building. Inmates whispered nervously whenever a guard approached, their voices dropping to hushed tones. It didn't take long for Claire to realize why. They were afraid of retaliation. Despite the challenges, Claire quickly learned how to blend in. She kept her head down during inspections, avoided drawing attention to herself, and followed the unwritten rules of survival. Slowly but surely, she earned the trust of her fellow inmates, who saw her as another lost soul trying to get through each day. They confided in her about their struggles, sharing stories of hardship and resilience. Some spoke bitterly about the guards, particularly Hale, whose name always seemed to come up in conversations about unfair treatment. One evening, while folding laundry in the communal area, Claire overheard 2 women talking about Hale. Their voices trembled as they recounted incidents where he'd singled them out for punishment over minor infractions. "He makes you feel like nothing," one woman muttered, clutching her shirt tightly. "Like you're less than human." Claire listened intently, her jaw tightening with anger. These weren't isolated complaints. They were patterns pointing to something far more sinister. As the days passed, Claire grew increasingly aware of Hale's presence. He prowled the hallways like a predator surveying its territory, his boots clicking sharply against the tiled floor. His gaze lingered too long on some inmates. His words carried a biting edge, and his actions bordered on cruelty. Claire knew she had to tread carefully. Getting too close too soon could blow her cover. But she also understood that gaining access to his inner circle was crucial if she wanted to gather solid evidence. Then came the moment that would test her resolve. During a routine search of the recreation room, Hale singled Claire out, accusing her of hiding contraband letters. Though innocent, Claire played along, feigning confusion and fear as he barked orders at her. For the first time since arriving, she felt the full weight of his authority pressing down on her. Her pulse raced. As he leaned in, his breath hot against her ear, warning her to stay in line. It was a chilling encounter, one that left her shaken yet determined. If she could endure this, she thought, she could endure anything. What Claire didn't realize then was that this was only the beginning. Each interaction with Hale brought new challenges, forcing her to dig deeper into her reserves of strength and cunning. Little did she know the friendships she formed and the risks she took would ultimately shape the course of her investigation and change her forever. Claire's days in the prison grew increasingly tense as Officer Derek Hale seemed to take a special interest in her. At first it was subtle, lingering glances during inspections, sarcastic remarks about her crime, and an almost predatory curiosity about why she never complained or caused trouble. Claire knew exactly what he was doing. He was testing her, trying to figure out if she was hiding something. But instead of confronting him directly, she played along, keeping her head low and pretending to be just another scared inmate. One evening, after the other prisoners had been locked away for the night, Claire found herself alone in the recreation room. She had requested extra time to review some fake legal documents she'd brought with her, a ploy to make her cover story more believable. The room was dimly lit, with only a single flickering fluorescent bulb casting shadows on the cracked walls. Claire sat at a small table, flipping through papers that meant nothing, when suddenly the door creaked open. Her heart skipped a beat as she looked up to see Hale standing there, his silhouette framed by the light from the hallway. "What are you still doing here?" he asked gruffly, stepping inside and letting the heavy door slam shut behind him. His voice echoed off the bare walls, making Claire flinch involuntarily. She quickly gathered the papers into a neat pile, her hands trembling slightly despite her best efforts to remain calm. "I'm reviewing my case," she stammered, forcing herself to sound timid. "I thought maybe I could find something to help my appeal." Hale smirked, clearly amused by her response. He took a few steps closer, his boots clicking loudly against the tiled floor. "Appeal? You think anyone cares about your little case?" He sneered, leaning down until his face was inches from hers. "People like you don't deserve second chances." Claire forced herself to meet his gaze, though every instinct screamed at her to look away. She nodded meekly, clutching the papers tighter to her chest. "Yes, sir," she whispered, hoping her act would satisfy him. But Hale wasn't done yet. He straightened up, crossing his arms over his broad chest. "You know what I think?" he said, his tone dripping with disdain. "I think you're hiding something. Maybe those letters aren't just for your appeal. Maybe they're messages to someone on the outside." Claire's stomach churned. Letters? She hadn't even considered planting such evidence. It was too risky. But now, thanks to Hale's accusation, she realized this might be the perfect opportunity to create a diversion. Still, she couldn't let him see her panic. Instead, she shook her head vigorously, feigning confusion. "No, sir, I swear. These are just notes from my lawyer." Hale didn't believe her for a second. With a sudden burst of anger, he grabbed her arm and yanked her out of the chair. Claire stumbled, nearly dropping the papers as pain shot through her wrist. For a moment, she forgot her training, her mind racing with fear and adrenaline. But then she remembered. This was part of the job. Every bruise, every insult, every ounce of humiliation would serve a purpose later. "You listen to me," Hale growled, pulling her close so their faces were almost touching. "If I catch you lying to me again, you'll regret it. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," Claire murmured, her voice barely audible. Tears welled up in her eyes, not because she was truly afraid, but because she needed him to believe she was broken, and it worked. After a long, tense moment, Hale released her with a shove, sending her sprawling onto the floor. Without another word, he turned and stormed out of the room, leaving Claire alone with her thoughts. For several minutes, she stayed where she was, hugging her knees to her chest as the reality of the situation sank in. This wasn't just a game anymore. Hale wasn't just a bad guard. He was dangerous. The way he carried himself, the way he spoke, the way he treated others like they were less than human. It all pointed to someone who believed he was untouchable. Claire knew she had to tread carefully if she wanted to survive. The next morning, the bruises on her arm were already starting to show. When another inmate noticed them during breakfast, Claire brushed it off, claiming she must have bumped into something during the night. But deep down, she felt a mix of emotions swirling inside her. Anger at Hale for his cruelty, frustration at the system that allowed him to act this way, and guilt for deceiving the women around her. They trusted her, confided in her, and shared their stories with her, never suspecting that she wasn't really one of them. As the days went by, Hale's behavior toward Claire became even more aggressive. During routine checks, he singled her out, criticizing everything from the way she folded her uniform to the way she addressed him. Other inmates began to notice, whispering among themselves about how she seemed to attract his ire. Some offered sympathy, while others gave her wary looks, wondering if she'd somehow crossed him. Claire endured it all silently, knowing that drawing attention to herself would only make things worse. But there were moments when the pressure threatened to overwhelm her. Late at night, lying awake on her thin mattress, she replayed the confrontation in the recreation room over and over in her mind. She wondered if she'd made the right choice in taking on this assignment. Was exposing corruption worth risking her safety, and possibly her life? Yet each time doubt crept in, she reminded herself of the bigger picture. The women in this facility deserved justice. If she could gather enough evidence to prove Hale's wrongdoing, she might be able to change their lives, and countless others, for the better. It wasn't until she formed an unexpected friendship that Claire began to see a glimmer of hope. One day, while waiting in line for the showers, she struck up a conversation with Rosa Mendez, a longtime inmate serving time for drug trafficking. Rosa was tough, with a no-nonsense attitude that commanded respect, but she also had a kind heart. Over time, the two women bonded, sharing stories about their lives before prison and their dreams for the future. When Claire casually mentioned her run-ins with Hale, Rosa's expression darkened. "That man is poison," she muttered under her breath, glancing around to ensure no guards were listening. "He thinks he can do whatever he wants because no one will stand up to him." Claire seized the opportunity. "You've dealt with him too?" she asked softly, her voice tinged with concern. Rosa hesitated, then nodded. "More times than I care to count. He likes to pick on the ones he thinks won't fight back, me included." She paused, studying Claire's face. "But you're different. You haven't let him break you yet." Claire smiled faintly, though inwardly, she marveled at Rosa's perceptiveness. "I guess I've learned to keep my head down," she replied evasively. Rosa leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "If you ever need help dealing with him, just say the word. I know people who owe me favors." At first, Claire dismissed the offer, not wanting to involve Rosa in her mission. But as Hale's harassment escalated, she realized she couldn't do this alone. Together, they devised a plan to secretly document his actions using a hidden recording device smuggled into the facility. It was risky, but it might be their only chance to gather concrete evidence. With Rosa's help, Claire managed to capture several incriminating interactions with Hale. One particularly damning recording featured him boasting about his ability to manipulate the system, claiming no one would believe the word of a convict over his badge. Listening to it later, Claire felt a surge of triumph mixed with disgust. This was proof, not just of Hale's arrogance, but of the systemic failures that allowed men like him to thrive. Still, the danger wasn't over. As the investigation progressed, Claire knew she was walking a fine line between success and disaster. Every move she made could either bring her closer to justice or put her deeper in harm's way. Yet, despite the risks, she refused to give up. For the first time in weeks, she felt a spark of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest places, courage and determination could shine through. As the days turned into weeks, Claire and Rosa's partnership became the backbone of Claire's mission. Their alliance wasn't just about gathering evidence, it was about survival. In a place where trust was as rare as sunlight, their bond gave them both a sense of purpose. For Claire, it was the first time she felt like she wasn't completely alone. For Rosa, it was a chance to fight back against the system that had stripped her of so much. Rosa proved to be more resourceful than Claire had initially imagined. She had built a network of connections within the prison over the years, earning respect from other inmates through her sharp wit and unwavering loyalty. When Claire confided in her about the hidden recording device they needed to document Hale's actions, Rosa didn't hesitate. "Leave it to me," she said with a confident smirk. "I know someone who can help." True to her word, Rosa arranged for the device to be smuggled into the facility through a kitchen worker, a young man named Luis, who occasionally brought in supplies. Luis owed Rosa a favor, and though he was nervous about getting involved, Rosa assured him it was worth the risk. "This isn't just about us," she told him firmly. "It's about making sure guys like Hale don't get away with what they're doing." The device itself was small, a tiny microphone embedded in a pen, but its potential impact was enormous. Once it was safely delivered, Claire and Rosa worked together to figure out how to use it effectively. They knew they couldn't afford any mistakes. If Hale or anyone else discovered what they were up to, the consequences would be catastrophic. Their plan was simple yet nerve-wracking. Claire would continue to play the role of a timid inmate, deliberately provoking Hale during interactions while secretly recording his responses. Rosa, meanwhile, would keep an eye out for any suspicious activity and act as a lookout whenever possible. It was a dangerous game, but both women understood the stakes. This wasn't just about catching one corrupt guard. It was about exposing the truth and holding the entire system accountable. The first real test of their plan came during a routine cell inspection. Hale entered Claire's dormitory with his usual air of superiority, barking orders at the inmates to stand against the wall while he searched their belongings. Claire tensed as he approached her bunk, flipping through her neatly stacked books and papers. Her heart raced when he picked up the pen containing the microphone, examining it closely. "What's this?" he asked, holding it up for her to see. Claire forced herself to stay calm, shrugging slightly. "Just something I found in the library," she lied. "I thought it might help me write letters to my family." Hale narrowed his eyes, clearly skeptical. For a moment, Claire thought he might confiscate it, or worse, realize what it really was. But then he tossed it back onto her bed with a dismissive grunt. "Don't let me catch you hoarding contraband again," he warned, before moving on to the next bunk. Claire exhaled slowly, relief washing over her. That close call only reinforced how careful they needed to be. Every step of this operation carried risks, and even the smallest slip-up could jeopardize everything. Over the following days, Claire managed to capture several incriminating moments with Hale. There was the time he berated another inmate for not standing quickly enough during roll call, calling her names that made Claire's blood boil. Then there was the late-night patrol where he cornered a young woman in the laundry room, threatening to extend her sentence if she didn't cooperate with him. Each recording added another layer to the damning portrait they were building of Hale, and each one fueled Claire's determination to see justice served. But as the evidence mounted, so did the tension between Claire and Hale. He seemed to sense that something was off, his suspicion growing with every encounter. One afternoon during a group activity in the recreation yard, he singled Claire out in front of everyone. "You've been awfully quiet lately," he remarked, his tone laced with mockery. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue, they do?" Other inmates glanced nervously at Claire, unsure of how she would respond. Claire forced a weak smile, keeping her voice soft and submissive. "No, sir, just trying to stay out of trouble." Hale chuckled darkly, circling her like a predator sizing up its prey. "That's smart. Because trust me, you don't want to end up on my bad side." His words sent a chill down Claire's spine, but she nodded obediently, pretending to shrink under his gaze. Later that evening, Claire confided in Rosa about the incident. "He's getting closer," she admitted, her voice tinged with worry. "I can feel it. He knows something's not right." Rosa placed a reassuring hand on Claire's shoulder. "Then we'll have to move faster," she said firmly. "We've got enough to take him down already. Let's make sure we're ready when the time comes." With Rosa's encouragement, Claire redoubled her efforts. She began documenting not just Hale's actions but also the ripple effects of his behavior on the other inmates. She interviewed women who had suffered under his watch, carefully noting their stories and cross-referencing them with the recordings. Together, they pieced together a comprehensive file that painted a chilling picture of systemic abuse and unchecked power. Despite the progress, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. The stress of maintaining her cover weighed heavily on her, and the constant threat of discovery loomed large. Some nights she lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation and interaction in her mind, searching for any sign that she'd slipped up. Other times she found herself wondering what would happen once the investigation was over. Would anyone believe her? Would the system actually change, or would it simply sweep the problem under the rug? Her doubts were interrupted one day when Rosa approached her with urgent news. "Luis heard some guards talking," she whispered, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. "They're planning a surprise search of all cells tomorrow morning. If they find that pen..." Claire's stomach sank. They had no choice. They had to act fast. That night, after lights out, Claire retrieved the pen from its hiding spot and handed it to Rosa. "Take it," she urged. "Find a way to get it out of here. We can't risk losing it now." Rosa hesitated, concern flashing across her face. "Are you sure? What if they suspect you?" "I'll deal with it," Claire replied, forcing a brave smile. "Just promise me you'll get this to the right people." With a nod, Rosa slipped the pen into her pocket and disappeared into the shadows. Claire watched her go, a mix of fear and hope swirling inside her. She knew the next 24 hours would be critical. If everything went according to plan, the evidence would soon be in safe hands. But if anything went wrong... As dawn broke the next morning, the sound of boots echoed down the hallway, signaling the start of the surprise search. Claire braced herself, knowing she had done everything she could. As the guards ransacked her cell, tossing her belongings onto the floor, she kept her expression blank, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her fear. When the search ended without incident, Claire allowed herself a brief moment of relief. Whatever happened next, she knew she had taken a stand, and that in itself was a victory. The days following the surprise cell search felt like walking on thin ice for Claire. She knew that the evidence hidden in the pen was now out of her hands, but the uncertainty of whether it had reached safety gnawed at her. Every time a guard passed by or glanced in her direction, her heart raced, wondering if they somehow knew what she and Rosa had been up to. The weight of secrecy pressed down on her, making even the simplest tasks, like folding laundry or eating a meal, feel exhausting. Rosa, too, seemed tense. Though she assured Claire that Louis had managed to smuggle the pen out during his last supply run, neither of them could fully relax until they heard confirmation that the recordings were safe with the authorities. Until then, they had to act as though nothing unusual was happening. They continued their daily routines, avoiding drawing attention to themselves while silently counting down the hours until the next step. Despite the mounting pressure, Claire couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. For weeks, she had endured Hale's abuse, lived among frightened inmates, and risked everything to gather evidence. Now, for the first time since arriving at the facility, she allowed herself to imagine what might happen if their plan succeeded. Would Hale finally face consequences for his actions? Could this investigation lead to real change within the prison system? These thoughts kept her going, even when the fear threatened to overwhelm her. But just as Claire began to think they might actually pull it off, disaster struck. One afternoon, during a routine inspection of incoming mail, A package addressed to Claire caught the attention of one of the guards. It wasn't uncommon for inmates to receive letters from family or friends, but this particular envelope stood out. It bore the logo of a law firm, which immediately raised suspicions. The guard handed it over to Hale, who tore it open without hesitation. Inside was a stack of legal documents detailing Claire's supposed appeal process, but tucked between the pages was something unexpected. A handwritten note from an anonymous source claiming that Claire had been smuggling contraband items into the facility. Hale's eyes narrowed as he read the words aloud, his voice dripping with mockery. "Looks like we've got ourselves a rat," he sneered, waving the note in front of Claire's face. Claire's stomach dropped. She quickly realized that this was no coincidence, it was a setup. Someone had planted the note to frame her, likely Hale himself. He had grown suspicious of her behavior and decided to strike preemptively, hoping to discredit her before she could cause any trouble. Panic bubbled inside her, but she forced herself to stay calm. If she let him see how rattled she was, it would only make things worse. "What is this?" Claire asked, feigning confusion. Her voice trembled slightly, adding to the illusion of innocence. "I didn't write that. Someone must have put it there." Hale smirked, clearly enjoying her distress. "That's funny," he said, leaning in closer, "because it has your name all over it. Literally." He held up the envelope, again pointing to the address label. "Care to explain how your lawyer ended up sending you evidence of criminal activity?" Claire shook her head vigorously, clutching the edge of the table for support. "I don't know anything about it, I swear. Please, you have to believe me." For a moment, Hale studied her, his expression unreadable. Then, with a shrug, he turned to the other guards. "Take her to solitary," he ordered. "We'll sort this out later." As two officers grabbed her arms and led her away, Claire fought back tears of frustration. Solitary confinement was exactly what she didn't need right now. It would cut her off from Rosa and any updates about the evidence. Worse still, it meant Hale had successfully isolated her, leaving her vulnerable and powerless. As the heavy door of the isolation cell slammed shut behind her, Claire sank onto the cold concrete floor, feeling more trapped than ever. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. The tiny cell offered no distractions, forcing Claire to confront the gravity of her situation. Without access to the outside world, she had no way of knowing if the recordings had reached the proper authorities or if they'd fallen into the wrong hands. For all she knew, Hale could already be working to cover his tracks, erasing any trace of wrongdoing before anyone had a chance to act. Just when despair began to creep in, a glimmer of hope appeared. Late that night, a guard arrived with a tray of food, a bland sandwich and a cup of water. As he slid the tray through the narrow slot in the door, Claire noticed something wedged underneath it, a folded piece of paper. Her pulse quickened as she unfolded it carefully, recognizing Rosa's handwriting immediately. "They have it," the note read. "Evidence is safe. Stay strong." Relief washed over Claire like a tidal wave. Against all odds, Rosa and Luis had succeeded in getting the recordings out of the facility. Now it was only a matter of time before the authorities intervened. With renewed determination, Claire vowed to hold on just a little longer. No matter what Hale threw at her, she wouldn't break. Not now. Not when they were so close to victory. The next morning, Hale made good on his promise to sort things out. He stormed into the solitary wing, dragging Claire out of her cell and into an interrogation room. The space was small and sterile, with a single table and 2 chairs bolted to the floor. Hale gestured for her to sit, his demeanor colder and more menacing than usual. "So," he began, pacing back and forth in front of her, "let's talk about these so-called contraband items. Who sent them? And why?" Claire stared straight ahead, refusing to meet his gaze. "I told you I don't know anything about them," she replied evenly. "You're wasting your time." Hale stopped mid-step, slamming his fist onto the table. "Don't play dumb with me," he snapped. "I know you're hiding something. And if you don't start talking, I'll make sure your life here becomes unbearable." His threats hung heavy in the air, but Claire refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her crack. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, her expression calm despite the storm raging inside her. "Go ahead," she said softly. "Do your worst. But you can't scare me into confessing to something I didn't do." For a split second, Hale looked taken aback. He wasn't used to inmates standing up to him, especially not someone as seemingly meek as Claire. Recovering quickly, he leaned in close, his breath hot against her ear. "Mark my words," he growled. "This isn't over." When the interrogation ended, Claire was returned to her cell, physically unharmed but emotionally drained. Yet deep down she felt a strange sense of pride. For the first time since entering the facility, she had faced Hale head-on and refused to back down. She knew it wouldn't be easy. There would undoubtedly be more challenges ahead. But she also knew that she had allies on both sides of the prison walls, people who believed in her mission and were willing to fight alongside her. That night, as she lay on the hard mattress staring at the ceiling, Claire allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She thought about the women she had met in the facility, their stories of resilience, their quiet acts of defiance, and their unwavering hope for a better future. She thought about Rosa, whose courage and resourcefulness had been instrumental in keeping their operation alive. And she thought about the countless others who had suffered under men like Hale, their voices silenced by fear and oppression. In that moment, Claire realized that this investigation wasn't just about exposing one corrupt guard. It was about giving a voice to those who had none. It was about proving that even in the darkest places, justice could still prevail. And as long as there were people willing to stand up and fight, there was always hope for change. Unbeknownst to Claire, wheels were already in motion outside the prison walls. Federal agents had received the evidence and were reviewing it meticulously, piecing together a case that would bring Hale and his accomplices to justice. Within days, reinforcements would arrive, ready to dismantle the web of corruption that had festered unchecked for far too long. All Claire had to do was hang on a little longer and trust that the truth would set them all free. The days in solitary confinement felt endless for Claire. The cold, gray walls of her tiny cell seemed to close in on her with each passing hour. There was no clock, no window, and no way to mark the passage of time except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Meals came sporadically, bland sandwiches, lukewarm water, and occasionally a piece of fruit, but they were little more than reminders that she was still alive. Despite the bleakness, Claire clung to the note Rosa had smuggled to her. "They have it. Evidence is safe. Stay strong." Those few words became her lifeline, replaying in her mind like a mantra whenever doubt crept in. Meanwhile, outside the prison walls, the evidence Claire and Rosa had risked so much to gather was making waves. Federal agents pored over the recordings, their expressions growing darker with every word Hale uttered. His arrogance shone through in every interaction. He mocked the inmates, bragged about his unchecked authority, and even admitted to manipulating the system to avoid accountability. It was damning proof of systemic abuse, and the investigators knew they had enough to act. But justice doesn't move as quickly as hope demands. While the wheels of bureaucracy turned, Claire remained trapped in her cell, unaware of how close she was to freedom. She spent her time reflecting on everything she'd endured since stepping foot into the facility. The bruises from Hale's rough handling had faded, but the emotional scars lingered. Every insult, every threat, every moment of humiliation replayed. In her mind, fueling both her anger and her determination, she reminded herself why she was there, not just to expose Hale, but to fight for the women who couldn't fight for themselves. Then, one morning, something changed. Instead of the usual clang of metal doors and muffled footsteps echoing down the hallway, Claire heard unfamiliar voices. They were sharp, authoritative, and carried an air of urgency. Her heart raced as she pressed her ear against the door, straining to catch snippets of conversation. "Search warrant, facility-wide lockdown, detain all personnel." The phrases were fragmented, but their meaning was clear. Something big was happening. Moments later, the heavy door to her cell swung open, revealing two men in dark suits flanked by uniformed officers. One of them stepped forward, holding up a badge. "Claire Bennett?" he asked, his tone professional yet kind. "We're here to get you out." For a moment, Claire couldn't speak. Was this real? Or was it another cruel trick orchestrated by Hale to break her spirit? But when the agent extended a hand to help her up, she realized it wasn't a dream. Relief washed over her as tears streamed down her face. She nodded weakly, allowing them to lead her out of the suffocating cell and into the bright light of the corridor beyond. As they walked through the facility, Claire noticed chaos erupting around her. Guards were being rounded up, their faces pale with shock or flushed with anger. Inmates huddled together in groups, whispering excitedly about what was happening. Some cheered when they saw Claire emerge from solitary, recognizing her as the quiet woman who had somehow sparked this dramatic turn of events. Though she wanted to explain, to tell them that she hadn't done it alone, there was no time. The agents ushered her toward the exit, where a black SUV waited to take her to safety. Once inside the vehicle, Claire finally allowed herself to exhale. For weeks, she had worn the mask of a frightened inmate, suppressing her true identity for the sake of the mission. Now, as the car sped away from the prison, she began to shed that persona piece by piece. The weight of constant vigilance lifted, replaced by a sense of accomplishment and exhaustion. She leaned back against the seat, closing her eyes as the adrenaline slowly ebbed away. Back at the facility, the fallout was immediate and explosive. Officers were questioned, records were seized, and inmates were interviewed to corroborate the allegations against Hale and his accomplices. When federal agents confronted Hale, his initial defiance crumbled under the weight of the evidence. He stammered, denied, and tried to shift blame onto others, but the recordings painted an undeniable picture of his misconduct. By the end of the day, he was in handcuffs, his face contorted with rage as he was led out of the building in disgrace. News of the investigation spread quickly, igniting outrage across the country. Journalists descended on the small town, eager to uncover the full scope of corruption within the prison system. Politicians called for hearings, activists demanded reform, and social media buzzed with hashtags calling for justice. Amid the frenzy, Claire's name surfaced as the undercover investigator who had risked everything to expose the truth. At first, she tried to stay out of the spotlight, preferring to let the evidence speak for itself. But as the public clamored for answers, she realized she had a responsibility to share her story. Her testimony before Congress was a pivotal moment, not just for her, but for the entire nation. Standing at the podium, dressed in a crisp suit that felt foreign after months in an orange jumpsuit, Claire recounted her experiences in vivid detail. She spoke about the fear that gripped the inmates, the abuse they endured, and the systemic failures that allowed men like Hale to thrive unchecked. Her voice trembled at times, but her resolve never wavered. "This isn't just about one bad guard," she said firmly. "It's about a culture of impunity that has festered for far too long. If we want to create a fairer, more humane system, we need to hold everyone accountable, from the lowest-ranking officer to the highest levels of leadership." The room erupted in applause as she finished speaking, but Claire didn't linger to bask in the praise. She returned to her hotel room, drained but determined. The fight wasn't over. It was only beginning. In the weeks that followed, she worked tirelessly to advocate for policy changes aimed at protecting incarcerated individuals from abuse. She met with lawmakers, attended rallies, and collaborated with organizations dedicated to prison reform. Each step brought her closer to the vision she had fought so hard to achieve, a world where no one would have to endure what she and countless others had suffered. Through it all, Claire stayed in touch with Rosa, whose bravery had been instrumental in their success. Thanks to her cooperation during the investigation, Rosa received a reduced sentence and early release. When they reunited for the first time outside the prison walls, the two women embraced tightly, tears streaming down their faces. "You did it," Rosa said, her voice choked with emotion. "You actually did it." Claire shook her head, smiling softly. "We did it," she corrected. "None of this would have been possible without you." Their friendship deepened in the months that followed. Claire offered Rosa guidance as she adjusted to life on the outside. helping her navigate job applications, housing options, and counseling services. In return, Rosa reminded Claire of the importance of resilience and hope, qualities she had witnessed firsthand during their time in the facility. Together, they formed a bond stronger than anything either of them had experienced before, a testament to the power of solidarity in the face of adversity. Despite the progress they made, Claire couldn't shake the lingering effects of her ordeal. The nightmares persisted, waking her in the middle of the night drenched in sweat. Flashbacks of Hale's menacing presence haunted her during quiet moments, forcing her to confront the trauma she had buried beneath layers of determination. Therapy helped, as did the unwavering support of her colleagues and friends, but healing was a slow process. Still, she refused to let it define her. Instead, she channeled her pain into action, using her experiences to push for meaningful change. One evening, as she sat on her apartment balcony watching the sunset, Claire reflected on how far she had come. From the moment she volunteered for the assignment, she had known it wouldn't be easy. But she hadn't anticipated just how deeply it would affect her, or how profoundly it would shape her understanding of justice. What started as a mission to expose corruption had evolved into a personal journey of growth, empathy, and purpose. And though the road ahead was uncertain, Claire knew one thing for sure: she would never stop fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Months had passed since the dramatic events at the correctional facility, and life outside prison walls was beginning to feel normal again for Claire. Yet, normalcy didn't mean forgetting. Each morning, as she sipped her coffee and prepared for the day ahead, fragments of her time undercover surfaced in her mind, memories that refused to fade quietly into the background. She often thought about Rosa, whose resilience had inspired her during the darkest moments of their ordeal. They spoke regularly now, exchanging messages filled with updates on their lives and reflections on how much they had both grown. Rosa was thriving in ways neither of them could have imagined when they first met, behind those cold, gray walls. With Claire's help, she secured a job at a local bakery, where her knack for baking turned out to be more than just a hobby. It became her passion. She rented a small apartment, decorated it with bright colors and plants, and even enrolled in evening classes to earn her GED. "I never thought I'd get a second chance," Rosa admitted during one of their calls. "But here I am, building something new, and it feels good." Claire smiled at Rosa's words, feeling a swell of pride. Knowing that her work hadn't only exposed corruption, but also given someone like Rosa an opportunity to rebuild her life made all the sacrifices worthwhile. Still, she couldn't ignore the lingering scars from her own experience. While Rosa embraced her newfound freedom wholeheartedly, Claire found herself grappling with questions that no amount of therapy or reflection seemed to answer fully. Had justice truly been served? Could a system so deeply flawed ever be fixed? These thoughts weighed heavily on her as she stepped into a congressional hearing room once again. This time, however, she wasn't there to share her personal story. Instead, she was invited as an expert witness to discuss broader reforms aimed at preventing abuse within prisons. The room buzzed with anticipation as lawmakers, activists, and journalists gathered to hear what promised to be a landmark session. Claire took her seat at the table, clutching a folder filled with notes and recommendations she had spent weeks preparing. When her turn came to speak, she stood confidently, her voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in her chest. "The case against Officer Derek Hale was not an isolated incident," she began, scanning the room to ensure her words reached everyone present. "It was a symptom of a much larger problem, a culture of impunity that allows individuals in positions of power to exploit and harm without consequence. To address this, we need systemic changes that prioritize accountability, transparency, and humanity." She went on to outline practical solutions: mandatory body cameras for guards, independent oversight committees to investigate complaints, increased training programs focused on ethical conduct, and better support systems for inmates. Her suggestions were met with nods of approval and murmurs of agreement. But Claire knew that talk alone wouldn't bring about change. It would take relentless advocacy, political will, and public pressure to turn these ideas into reality. As she wrapped up her testimony, she ended with a poignant reminder. Justice isn't just about punishing wrongdoing. It's about creating a world where such abuses can never happen again. The applause that followed was thunderous, but Claire left the hearing feeling conflicted. On one hand, she was proud of the progress being made. Several states had already announced plans to implement some of the reforms she proposed, and grassroots movements advocating for prison reform were gaining momentum nationwide. On the other hand, she couldn't shake the knowledge that change wouldn't come overnight. There would still be resistance, setbacks, and battles yet to fight. In the evenings, Claire often retreated to her balcony, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. These quiet moments allowed her to process everything she had been through, the fear, the triumphs, the friendships forged in unlikely places. Sometimes she replayed conversations with Rosa in her head, marveling at how their bond had transcended the confines of the prison walls. Other times, she thought about the women she had left behind, wondering if they felt any safer now that Hale was gone. Were they hopeful about the future, or did they believe nothing would really change? Her musings were interrupted one night by a knock at her door. Opening it, she was surprised to find Rosa standing there, holding a box of freshly baked cookies. "I figured you could use some cheering up," Rosa said with a grin, stepping inside. "Plus, I wanted to thank you for everything." Claire laughed softly, taking the box from her. "You don't have to thank me. We got through it together. Remember?" "Yeah, but you're the reason I'm standing here today," Rosa replied earnestly. "Without you, I'd still be stuck in that place, letting people like Hale walk all over me. You showed me I could fight back and win." Touched by Rosa's words, Claire pulled her into a tight hug. In that moment, she realized that while the scars of her mission might never fully heal, they were a testament to something greater, the power of courage, solidarity, and hope. Together, they had faced unimaginable challenges and emerged stronger on the other side. As the weeks turned into months, Claire threw herself into her work with renewed energy. She traveled across the country, speaking at conferences, meeting with policymakers, and collaborating with organizations dedicated to criminal justice reform. Everywhere she went, she shared her story, not to seek recognition, but to remind others that meaningful change was possible if people were willing to stand up and demand it. Her message resonated deeply, inspiring countless individuals to join the movement. Despite her busy schedule, Claire made sure to carve out time for herself. She started journaling, pouring her thoughts onto paper as a way to process her emotions. She took long walks in the park, finding solace in nature's beauty. And she reconnected with old friends, rediscovering the joy of laughter and companionship after months of isolation. Slowly but surely, she began to reclaim pieces of herself that had been buried beneath the weight of her mission. One evening, as she sat on her couch flipping through photo albums, Claire paused at a picture taken years ago. It was of her graduating from college, surrounded by classmates who had cheered her on as she accepted her diploma. Back then, she had dreamed of becoming a force for good in the world, but she had never imagined it would lead her down such a challenging path. Smiling faintly, she closed the album and set it aside. Life rarely unfolded the way people expected, but sometimes those unexpected twists led to the most rewarding journeys. Looking toward the future, Claire remained steadfast in her commitment to fighting for justice. She understood that the road ahead would be long and fraught with obstacles, but she also knew she wasn't alone. From Rosa to the countless advocates working tirelessly alongside her, she had built a community of allies who shared her vision of a fairer, more compassionate world. And as long as they continued to stand together, she believed anything was possible. In the end, Claire's story wasn't just about exposing corruption or surviving adversity. It was about transformation. It was about learning to see strength in vulnerability, beauty in struggle, and purpose in pain. It was about proving that even in the darkest corners of society, light could shine through. And though she didn't have all the answers, she held onto one unwavering truth. As long as there were people willing to fight for what was right, there was always hope for a better tomorrow.